Ukraine braces for further strikes after Russia unleashes over 150 missiles over several cities in its biggest bombardment so far. Israel warns of an expansion into southern Gaza as South Africa institutes proceedings against Israel under the UN's Genocide Convention. 8 months on, thousands dead and millions displaced, rare access to rebel territory in Sudan's forgotten war. And as giant waves continue to pound the US West Coast, a warning that wave heights are continuing to increase around the world. I'm Anton. This is SBS World News. Good evening. Ukraine is bracing for further missile strikes after Russia unleashed the biggest attack in almost 2 years of war. At least 31 people were killed and more than 160 others wounded in an assault that lasted for 18 hours. The Ukrainian Air Force says Russia fired 158 missiles and drones at cities across the country, from Kharkiv in the east, Lviv in the west, and Odessa in the south. The capital, Kyiv, also came under attack, as well as the central cities of Dnipro and Zaporizhia. At one point, Poland, a NATO member, scrambled fighter jets to intercept a missile it says briefly crossed into its territory.
Not for the first time, Kyiv awoke to the sounds of war. But this was different. This time, Russia threw everything it had into multiple attacks. A calculated move designed to overwhelm Ukraine's air defences. Wave after wave of cruise missiles fired from strategic bombers, hypersonic missiles from MiG aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, anti-radar missiles, as well as dozens of attack drones. Most were intercepted, but many got through. Residential buildings, a shopping centre, even a maternity hospital were among the buildings damaged. Amid the destruction, extraordinary tales of survival. This man found trapped under a concrete block. Emergency workers managing to lift it off him. For weeks, Ukrainian officials had been warning that Russia might be stockpiling missiles for just such an attack. But their appeals for more military aid have come up against dwindling support in Western capitals. For the doubters, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba had this message. Today, millions of Ukrainians awoke to the loud sound of explosions. I wish those sounds of explosions in Ukraine could be heard all around the world. The UN Security Council met in emergency session, condemnation widespread.
Tragically, 2023 is ending as it began, with devastating violence against the people of Ukraine.
Rather than peace, Putin chose to mark this holiday season and usher in the new year with an unprecedented number of drone and missile attacks.
Russia, though, blamed Ukraine's Western backers.
По сути, Украина сегодня – это не что иное, как частная военная кампания в руках западных стран, задача которой – нанести максимальный урон России.
Moscow says it targeted only military infrastructure, and that the civilian casualties came from Ukrainian intercepts. But there are new concerns the war could spill over. 2 US fighter jets, along with 2 Polish F-16s, were scrambled from bases in Poland, Warsaw alleging that a Russian missile entered Polish territory. The Security Cabinet held an emergency session and demanded an explanation from Moscow. It said there was no evidence of an incursion.
Rzeczywiście rakieta przekroczyła terytorium Polski. Powiem więcej, skierowaliśmy siły, samoloty, które miały ją przechwycić i w razie potrzeby zestrzelić. Ale zarówno jej czas przebywania na terenie Polski, sposób w jaki manewrowała, jakby uniemożliwiły wykonanie po prostu tego manewru. Dlatego rakieta zdążyła opuścić terytorium Polski.
As the attack was taking place, President Volodymyr Zelensky released pictures of a visit to the frontline city of Avdiivka, his message of defiance unchanged. As Ukraine approaches its 3rd year of all-out war. Nick Wells, SBS World News.
Israel has warned it's expanding its operations in southern Gaza, where tens of thousands of people have been told to flee to safety. It comes as the United Nations cautioned of a widening regional conflict with devastating consequences. Amidst international calls for a ceasefire, South Africa has filed an application to the International Court of Justice asking it to begin proceedings against Israel.
Flares light up the night sky over the Gaza Strip. Daytime brings with it a familiar and distressing sight. The aftermath of an Israeli airstrike, the number of dead mounting. The United Nations estimates nearly 85% of Gaza's 2.3 million people have been displaced, some finding shelter in these relief camps. Israel announcing no let-up in its operations into southern Lebanon.
אנחנו ממשיכים לבצע תקיפות עצימות ולפגוע בפריסה של חיזבאללה שהייתה סמוך לגבול הצפון. היא כבר לא נראית כפי שנראתה ב6 באוקטובר, והיא לא תשוב להיראות אותו הדבר. דרום לבנון לא יהיה כשהיה.
A development the United Nations would like to avoid.
There have been several instances of strikes deeper into the territories of Lebanon and Israel, raising the specter of an uncontained conflict with potentially devastating consequences for the people of both countries.
Israel's response swift.
Do these attacks sound like a mere spillover? Is this violence occurring magically on its own? Is it not clear that genocidal terrorists are seeking to murder Israeli citizens every single day?
As the international community grapples for common ground, South Africa, a long-time supporter of Palestinian statehood, withdrew its diplomat from Israel in November and is now taking Israel to the International Court of Justice in an 84-page document claiming, among other things, that Israel since October 7, 2023 in particular, has failed to prevent genocide and failed to prosecute the direct and public incitement to genocide. And that Israel has engaged in, is engaging in, and risks further engaging in genocidal acts against the Palestinian people. It was quickly rebuffed by Israel's foreign ministry, which described it as blood libel and took to social media, saying South Africa's claim lacks both a factual and legal basis and constitutes a despicable and contemptuous exploitation of the court. And in Cairo, efforts to arrange a ceasefire appear to have stalled. Hamas with this message.
There will be no prisoner swap deal or no negotiations under fire until the Israeli aggression ends.
In Washington, the Biden administration for the second time bypassed congressional review for weapons sales to Israel, this time to the tune of $215 million. On the ground in Gaza, aid keeps trickling in, although not without problems. The United Nations accusing Israel of targeting aid vehicles. Attacks on humanitarian workers are unlawful. The conflict must stop. No signs of stopping yet. The rubble increasing with every passing day. Edmund Roy, SBS World News.
A US Navy ship in the Red Sea has shot down a ballistic missile and a drone in the latest attacks by Houthi rebels on international shipping. No damage was reported to any of the 18 ships in the area, according to US Central Command. It's the 22nd attempted attack by Houthis on international shipping since October the 19th, when cruise missiles and drones from Yemen were intercepted heading potentially towards Israel.
Tonight, Yemeni state media showing huge pro-Palestinian crowds waving flags and placards in the capital. These mass protests held weekly in Yemen since Israel's bombardment of Gaza began in response to the deadly October 7th terrorist attack by Hamas. Claiming to be in protest of Israel's war against Hamas, Iranian-backed Houthi rebels inside Yemen on Thursday launching their 22nd strike on vessels in the Red Sea, a vital route for global shipping. A US warship once again shooting down a drone and ballistic missile. Houthi leader Mohammed al-Houthi telling ABC News the ball is in President Biden's court. We seek to stop the aggression on Gaza, and the American president seeks to expand the conflict. If the American president aims to expand the conflict, it is up to him, al-Houthi says. Tonight, the White House saying the United States is prepared to lead the global response in countering what they call the Houthis' indiscriminate attacks.
Britt Clinette reporting there. China has appointed former Navy Commander Dong Jun as its new defence minister, 2 months after the sudden removal of his predecessor. He takes over from General Li Shangfu, who was last seen in public in August. Mr. Dong's appointment was announced at a standing committee meeting of the National People's Congress in Beijing. It follows the dismissal of a number of top military officials earlier this year. Brazil has expressed concern over the escalating border dispute between Venezuela and Guyana as tensions rise in the region. Venezuela has held military exercises after Britain deployed a warship to waters off the coast of Guyana, a former British colony and ally. The Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro accused the UK of provocation and said he'd ordered defensive action by his country's armed forces. Venezuela recently revived its historical claim to the oil-rich Essequiba region of Guyana. And hundreds of university students have blocked a key intersection in Serbia's capital, Belgrade, during the latest protest over alleged election fraud. The students and other protesters erected tents and set up camp during the day-long blockade in the city centre. They called for election results to be annulled and a new vote held. Opposition groups have contested the outcome of parliamentary and local ballots, which gave victory to the Serbian Progressive Party of President Aleksandar Vučić. Pressure is mounting on the US Supreme Court to determine if Donald Trump will be on the 2024 ballot following the decision of a second state to disqualify him. The former president says he will appeal what he calls Maine's atrocious decision to bar him from the Republican Party ballot. The first primaries in the race for the White House begin in January.
Please join me in welcoming the next president of the United States, Governor Ron DeSantis.
Republican hopeful Ron DeSantis struggling in the polls, trying to whip up enthusiasm.
Thank you so much.
Whereas Donald Trump's latest battle ensuring he stays on the ballot. 6 of the 9 Supreme Court justices are Conservative and 3 of those he appointed. The court has already been asked to review Colorado's decision to kick Donald Trump off the ballot. The focus on the Supreme Court sharper after Maine became the second state to bar the Republican frontrunner.
I think one thing that the Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, is going to want to do is not have a decision, if the court takes the case, that divides on party lines, which would further inflame partisan passions in the United States.
The state of Maine determined that Trump is disqualified from running for the presidency for his part in an attempted insurrection on January 6. A former Democrat state senator who brought the challenge delighted.
You know, hard to imagine that a president would commit insurrection against our country, but I'm glad to know that the laws that we have in place are going to protect us from the possibility that that person could be sent back to the White House.
But Maine's Republicans alarmed.
Our voting rights enshrined in the Constitution are sacred to us. And to have one particular person remove really the top candidate from the ballot because she dislikes that person just smells of politics.
Shenna Bellows, Maine's Secretary of State, who decided against Trump, is already facing attack.
We have received threatening communications. Those are unacceptable.
What's clear to Trump rivals like Chris Christie is that the former president is not suffering politically.
It makes him a martyr. You know, he's very good at playing poor me, poor me. He's always complaining.
Trump's advisers are preparing to file legal challenges next week as the matter becomes urgent. First voting in the Republican Party nominating process begins on January 15. Pruluwan, SBS World News.
Coming up, a review is launched into the Bureau of Meteorology's warning system after accusations of recent failures. A growing number of local councils doing away with citizenship ceremonies on Australia Day. And the cafes where strangers meet to discuss what's considered a taboo in some cultures, death and dying. Warnings are in place across much of the United States west coast as large swells and rough surf continue to pound the coastline. At least 8 people have been injured as giant waves led to localised flooding. Scientists say wave heights are continuing to increase around the world.
Waves up to 12 metres high, slamming into the California coast, breaching seawalls and flooding streets. People caught off guard, running for safety.
Well, the water came over the wall, and you probably saw from many of the videos that it washed down the street like it was a river. And of course, that turned and went into our complex and flooded it completely.
We've been here for about 15 years, never seen them so big. It just looked like a river and just kept coming.
At least 8 people have been injured. Businesses and homes damaged.
I just feel bad for the restaurants. I know they just went through renovations from the last time this happened.
Right now, we're just trying to keep the houses from flooding.
Surfers in some areas making the most of the conditions, spectators enjoying the show.
It's always been a bucket list item of mine to really go and see Mavericks firsthand and just see the beauty that the wave has to offer. It's always been a dream, so it's awesome to be here today and see it firsthand.
Others staying on the safe side.
We always look forward to the big waves, but Mother Nature had a little more than we had planned for, and so I did not surf yesterday. I was helping with the neighbors and just making sure everyone was safe, and we actually picked a few people out of the water.
The monster waves caused by massive storm swells in the South Pacific Ocean.
The Southern Ocean is basically the breeding ground for ocean swell. So the big storms that propagate around Antarctica, they spawn off swell that propagates right across the Pacific Ocean, the South Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean.
Scientists studying the oceanic phenomenon say average wave heights have increased about 5 to 10% over the past 30 years. One study in the Journal of Geophysical Research found average winter wave heights on California's beaches increased by as much as 30 centimetres in the last half a century.
I think we now can say that the changing wave climate is linked to climate change. We know from our computer models, the same models that we use to predict what temperature will be in 100 years' time. We know that those models also say that the wind speeds are changing as well.
Projecting steady increases in wave heights all over the world. Australia's shorelines, already experiencing extensive coastal erosion, are among the most vulnerable.
Australia is actually probably going to be affected more than anywhere else on the planet because the biggest changes are occurring in the Southern Ocean. So all of the southern regions of Australia can expect that the swells that they're receiving from the Southern Ocean, they have been increasing over the last 30 years, and we expect that they're going to increase further over the next 50 to 100 years.
In California, the cleanup efforts continue, with current conditions expected to last until Sunday. Alexandra Jones, SBS World News.
Torrential rain has flooded homes in northeastern Peru, turning streets into rivers in inundated towns in the Amazonas region. Drone vision revealing the extent of the flooding. Some residents were forced to evacuate. At least 20 communities were affected. The Bureau of Meteorology has been tasked with closing gaps in its emergency warning system after accusations of unforgivable failures. Mayors in Queensland say residents were not given timely warnings ahead of deadly storms that lashed around Christmas. Some of those communities still affected, now preparing for more wild weather.
The storm announced its arrival in Brisbane. Whipping wind in Breanna, turning the Sunshine Coast. Bringing buckets of hail up to 5 centimetres to the Western Downs.
We are expecting to see further severe thunderstorms, particularly through southeast Queensland, which could cause flash flooding. And some of those thunderstorms could have destructive winds, causing quite a bit of damage as well.
Parts of northern New South Wales also seeing thunderstorms. But it's storm-battered southeast Queensland on the receiving end of the worst weather. Severe warnings are in place from the Central Highlands and coalfields to Gari.
Reminding people across northeast New South Wales and also particularly southeast Queensland to keep an eye on the warnings through the day.
The Weather Bureau's emergency warning system now under review. There's criticism following ex-tropical cyclone Jasper that lashed Queensland's far north. And the Christmas storms, which killed 10 people across the country.
What I've asked the National Emergency Management Agency to do is to bring together the Bureau of Meteorology, state governments and councils to see where there might be some gaps in the system in terms of getting those text messages out. It might be that the Bureau needs to provide slightly more clear information than they are at the moment.
Some residents say they didn't receive messages or alerts until it was too late, leading to questions about whether the $800 million a year institution is value for money.
Wherever the gaps are in the system, I'm keen to resolve them because, of course, we want to make sure that people are receiving the most accurate, reliable information they can.
Almost 30,000 households are still without power. This latest storm only hampering efforts to get people back on the grid.
To them, I want to reassure them that everyone is absolutely focused on reconnecting their electricity just as quickly as we can safely do so. The first priority has to be the safety of our emergency service.
While southern Queensland battles storms, heatwave conditions are gripping the north, extending across the top of the Northern Territory and Western Australia. Marble Bar in the Pilbara set to record a stifling 49 degrees.
But many other locations right across the north climbing up 5 to 10 degrees above average, well into the high 30s, and in some cases the mid to high 40s. So really, really hot conditions across northern Australia.
The Minister for Emergency Management says with climate change causing more frequent, extreme weather events, Australia must better prepare.
We've done probably more work than ever before this year to get ready for disasters with state and local governments. But unfortunately, there are always going to be unpredictable weather systems, and that's why we all need to be ready.
Liz Maddock, SBS World News.
A growing number of local councils are doing away with citizenship ceremonies on Australia Day after new laws which made the event mandatory on that date were scrapped a year ago. Councils can now hold Australian citizenship ceremonies on the 3 days before or after January the 26th. Many Indigenous Australians consider the date to be a day of mourning. Minister for Immigration and Citizenship, this Shadow Minister, Dan Tehan, says the changes undermine Australia Day.
Anthony Albanese needs to be upfront with the Australian people. If he doesn't think it's worthy to hold citizenship ceremonies on our Australia Day, he is undermining Australia Day. Councils should be required to hold citizenship ceremonies on Australia Day. It is our national day.
More than 300 of Australia's 537 local councils will hold a citizenship ceremony on January the 26th next year. Australia's population is ageing, and according to the federal government, over the next 4 decades, those aged over 85 will triple, those aged over 65 will double. Despite living longer, experts say too few people discuss end-of-life plans. A growing global project aims to change that.
A group of strangers is meeting for tea and cake, but this is no ordinary cafe. They've gathered to talk about death and dying.
We do come, particularly in the West, from quite a culture of death denial, so it will open up conversations that may flow in unexpected directions.
Personal stories range from caring for lost loved ones to facing mortality.
As I was lying there healing and I was having the chemo.
Among the participants, 76-year-old Nina Angelo.
In 2019, I was diagnosed with a stage 4 lymphoma.
6 rounds of chemotherapy followed. Miss Angelo lost her vitality along with her vibrant red hair. Although doing well now, she says the cancer diagnosis combined with a severe fall 3 years later taught her a lot about resilience.
So even though my body was breaking down, my spirit really came to the fore and went, no, you're going to be around for a while. Look at me now.
Participant 61-year-old William Roach also welcomes the opportunity to speak out after listening to crisis calls for a decade.
I would love to see more of these because there is an invisibility about death. We just do not have these discussions. It's not in our face. It's not something we think about.
Facilitator Melissa Halliday has run death cafes for more than 10 years after working as a lawyer, funeral director and celebrant.
So it began in 2004 by Bernard Cortez, a Swiss sociologist, anthropologist. It's been going for 12 years. It's now in 85 countries, and it is a phenomenon.
According to the federal government, over the next 40 years, the number of Australians aged 65 and over will more than double, and the number aged 85 and over will more than triple. Despite living longer, experts say too few people discuss end-of-life plans.
It's a taboo in Asian culture. In a lot of the Asian community, people don't even talk about the cancer.
Often that first conversation may only happen at the time that you're given a life-limiting diagnosis, when you're forced to consider your mortality. And that is already an incredibly stressful time in your life. So really trying to encourage people to think about it a little bit before then.
Miss Angelo's parents met in Auschwitz and survived the Holocaust. Now she wants to discuss her eventual demise with her own children.
My kids somehow they just don't want to go there with me. It's the most normal thing, everyone's going to. It is about the courage it takes to actually go into that place and share it.
Alan Lee, SBS World News.
For the past 8 months, forces loyal to Sudan's army chief and de facto head of state, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, have been fighting the paramilitary rapid support forces led by his former deputy, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. The UN says more than 12,000 people have been killed and more than 6.5 million people displaced since the war started in April this year. It's been difficult for foreign journalists to report from within Sudan in what's described as the forgotten war. But our broadcast, Marielle Miller reporting from southern Sudan. Coming up, overall line honours for the second time in the Sydney to Hobart yacht race, with boats yet to cross the finish line. And cricket's technology debate can't overshadow Australia's triumphant year. China had hoped 2023 would see its economy soar following the pandemic, but instead it's faced a crisis in consumer confidence and crippling debt in its property sector. As the year ends, young people there are still struggling to find employment opportunities.
On a freezing winter night in Beijing, most people have taken refuge indoors to escape the sub-zero temperatures. But Chen Zimo is at her jewelry stand at an outdoor market, one of the few vendors left hoping for a few more sales. On a good day, she makes just over $30.
My income here isn't stable. I can make a bit more in peak season, but now it's so cold, not many people come out to shop. But I have to keep doing it to make a living.
During the pandemic, Chen took a break from her career in finance to look after her newborn son. But when she was ready to return to work, was unable to find a new job.
We spoke to other vendors who didn't want to appear on camera but had similar stories of falling on hard times. One man owns his own small company but it isn't doing well, so he's selling trinkets on the side in order to make ends meet. Another were a couple who used to own a restaurant that went bankrupt during the pandemic, so they've been forced to make and sell their own bracelets to make a living.
China had expected 2023 to be a year of booming post-COVID-19 recovery, but instead, economic growth has stagnated and the job market is tighter than it's been in decades.
There's a consensus that the economy is quite weak and the policy response remain quite lagging and insufficient. So on the micro level, when we look at the job market, it is quite a difficult year, especially towards the year end. Almost every company in the IT industry, in finance and in housing is trying to lay off more workers.
It's especially tough for new graduates. Unemployment among Chinese aged 16 to 24 hit a record high of 21.3% in June before the authorities stopped publishing figures. A persistent crisis in the housing sector, a traditional driver of growth, is also weighing on the economy. And people are choosing to save their money rather than spend it, hurting domestic consumption. The government insists conditions will improve in 2024.
Overall, the favorable conditions for China's development outweigh the unfavorable factors.
But until then, Chen Zimo says she will continue working at this market 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, hoping to make just enough to sustain her family for another day.
Katrina Yu reporting from Beijing. Time now for Saturday Sport with Breanna Holden, and calls for less technology in cricket.
Yeah, Anton, they've come from the Pakistan coach. The tourists feel hard done by after a controversial DRS call contributed to their defeat in the Boxing Day Test. As for Australia coach Andrew McDonald, he's been praising his team after one of its most successful years.
Racked up the trophies. In June, the team lifted the World Test Championship for the first time. A couple of months later, the Ashes were retained. Then, in November, a record-extending 6th ODI World Cup.
It's been jam-packed, and the success we've had, if we're measured by wins and losses and titles, then it's, I consider it right up there. So it's been demanding. The ability for the players to continue to find the energy at the right times in key moments of games is, that's been a standout.
Wicket 250 for Patrick Cummins. Risman doesn't want to go.
Australia's latest success wasn't without controversy. Mohammad Rizwan dismissed by the decision review system when he was threatening to hit Pakistan to victory.
I spoke to him, and he's a very honest person. But what he said to me, he said he did not even feel that it touched anywhere in the gloves. It's a technology show. It's not the cricket we are playing inside. So I believe this is the area need to be addressed rightly.
I think technology is always going to be challenged at certain times, but we've got to ask ourselves the question, is the game better with it there? Do we get more right? I'd say yes. We're talking about a world-class performer here. I think just nudged himself into the top 10 of all time. Missed a lot of cricket when he was younger as well, so he's sort of almost making up for a little bit of lost time.
The Renegades are on the board in the Big Bash League after a win over Adelaide. Chris Lynn and Darcy Short helps the Strikers set Melbourne a target of 177. With out-of-form batsman Nick Maddinson dropped from the side, it was Jake Fraser-McGurk who stepped up for Melbourne, smashing 70 off 37 balls, while veteran Sean Marsh also picked up a half-century as the Renegades chased down the target with 4 wickets and 8 balls to spare. The Netherlands have made a strong start to the United Cup, a coast-to-coast mixed team event. Taking on Norway, the Dutch were out of the blocks firing in Sydney's Ken Rosewall Arena. World number 51 Aranska Rus winning the opening singles match in straight sets. Norway's Kasper Ruud then powered to his own straight sets victory in the men's singles to draw the Norwegian team level. However, his victory wasn't enough to inspire Norway to a win in the opening tie, with the Dutch coming out on top in the mixed doubles to seal a 2-1 win. Both sides will now face Croatia, the third country in their group. While in Perth, China is making its debut in the tournament, and it was a winning start for Zhizhen Zhong, the only Chinese men's player on the ATP Tour, recovering from a set-down to beat Yuri Leheshka of the Czech Republic. And for China, the United Cup is a chance for it to test itself against the world's best. As well as facing the Czech Republic, it's in a group with Serbia, which means taking on men's world number 1 Novak Djokovic. Our reporter Chris Tan went to meet the underdogs, hoping to make a name for themselves.
China's top-ranked male player Zhang Zizeng has never visited Perth, but he's quickly turning into a favourite with local fans. Growing up in a sporty family, it was either swimming or tennis.
And then in the end, I choose tennis, which is because the swimming coach are too tough.
The 27-year-old now competing in the United Cup, playing the best tennis of his life. The kind of form Team China will need to make the final, but standing in the way, tournament heavyweight Serbia with world number 1 Novak Djokovic. This pre-season tournament is an opportunity for players to represent their country for both points and for pride. China making its debut at this year's United Cup is a reflection of its success in both the men's and women's rankings. Zizeng will team up with China's top-ranked female player and world number 15 Zheng Qingwen in the mixed doubles.
我感觉我们的优势还是会在底线和发球上面吧，因为他本身的实力就已经是非常出众，也 已经是相当不错，所以说对我来说，我的压力也会。
我觉得她是一个非常有特点的一个女球员，包括她很年轻，而且她每一天都非常的认真，训练啊、比赛都特别投入。
The future looks bright for Team China after Deng and Zheng each won gold at this year's Asian Games, meaning they've both qualified for the 2024 Paris Olympics. Christopher Tan, SBS World News.
In NFL, Cleveland has a new hero. Quarterback Jeff Flacco, the toast of the town after he sealed the side an unlikely place in the playoffs. 38-year-old Flacco, a former Super Bowl MVP, threw for 3 touchdowns as the Browns defeated the New York Jets 37-20. Since his signing as an injury replacement 5 weeks ago, the side's record is an impressive 4-1. The result guarantees Cleveland a wildcard place at minimum, with a chance still to finish top of its division. The Detroit Pistons are on the brink of holding the longest losing streak in NBA history. Against the Boston Celtics, the side held a 21-point lead at one stage, but still failed to break the skid. At 28 games without a win, Detroit now holds the longest in-season losing run, with a chance to break the all-time record when they play Toronto tomorrow.
I hurt for them. You know, we feel like we're just getting so close to not just winning one game, but winning a lot of games if we play that way versus most teams in the league.
Manchester City manager Pep Guardiola has pushed back on remarks his side is out of the Premier League title race. City currently sits 4th in the table behind Arsenal and Aston Villa and 5 points adrift of league leaders Liverpool, but have played 1 less game than most. Despite City struggling by its standards in the first half of the season, Guardiola insists his side has the depth of talent to challenge for an unprecedented 4th consecutive title.
It's so long. Premier League is never end. It's so long way, and many things. Man City, first included, many things going to happen. When we lose a game, we are out of the title race. When we win a game, we are there. It's the same for our contenders. So it's a question to be calm. What we have seen so far this year is everything can happen.
City could move into 2nd place with a win against bottom-placed Sheffield United tomorrow morning. For the first time this season, Sydney FC has strung together 2 wins in the A-League Men's. Their latest victory coming against top-of-the-table Wellington Phoenix. Ryan Grant gave Sydney a half-time lead before Phoenix equalised with fewer than 10 minutes on the clock. But the home team regains the lead with 2 goals in 8 minutes, giving coach Ufuk Talay bragging rights against his former assistant, Wellington boss Giancarlo Italiano. While in the women's clash earlier at Allianz Stadium, the match between Sydney FC and Wellington was decided by just the 1 goal. Janea Dos Santos scoring a second-half header for the Sky Blues. It moves Sydney up to 5th in the table as Phoenix stay in 3rd place. A Tasmanian boat has taken out overall honours in the Sydney to Hobart for the 2nd time in 5 years. Rough weather causing more than a dozen boats to retire in a race that's been described as a test of endurance.
Raising this trophy for the 2nd time. Tasmanian Mini Maxi alive, again taking out the overall win in a Sydney Hobart. Local knowledge aiding the victory.
In the end, the Derwent, is kind to people that know it.
Home ground advantage.
And yeah, a little home advantage.
The crew of 13 giving it their all in rough conditions.
There wasn't anyone at the end of the race that would have thought to themselves, I could have done a little bit harder, or I could have done a little bit better, or not. Everyone, you didn't even have to ask. Everything was just, everyone was on it.
Alive was 4th to cross the finish line 2 days ago, but with times corrected for handicap, it comes out on top at 3 days, 7 hours, 48 minutes and 14 seconds. Then New South Wales boats URM Group and Moneypenny before line honours champion Law Connect and runner-up Andu Comanche. The win makes it just the 2nd Tasmanian yacht to win the Tattersall Cup twice, after Westwood.
So the goal now will be to get to 3 and surpass Westwood.
Well, that's it. Yes. Let's make it 3.
Around half the boats still in the race are now finished, among them Antipodes, with navigator Lindsay May marking his 50th Sydney Hobart.
But it's just a great time to finish. A really difficult race, a very testing race.
The rough conditions forcing more than a dozen boats to retire.
We have had for maybe the last 5 or 6 years downwind races, but this is a typical Hobart race. It's a test of endurance, which they should be.
Spots at Kings Pier behind me are filling up fast. Most of those still sailing are expected to finish before the new year, but some may take a little longer to come in.
The race doesn't stop till the last boat comes in, so we're looking forward to them.
How you going, Ollie? Ollie's going well.
One of those expected in the new year is Sylph 6, with Ollie the cat on board. Karen Thomas, SBS World News.
And finally, Rio de Janeiro's famous Christ the Redeemer statue has commemorated football great Pelé on the anniversary of his death. The 30-metre statue was lit up with a projection of Pelé's famous number 10 jersey, complete with his signature on it. Brazilians gathered at the iconic tourist attraction to pay tribute to the 3-time World Cup winner. Pelé died aged 82. And that's the day in sport. And Anton, now that is one way to celebrate a legend of the game.
Sure was, a great champion. Thanks, Bree. Coming up, the weather and how the power of social media worked wonders for one hot dog restaurant in the US. A US restaurant owner is experiencing the benefits of social media firsthand after a viral post brought in droves of customers. The manager says he is overwhelmed by the response.
It's been a roller coaster ride for sure. We've had some people on Facebook tell us that they're coming in from like Colorado or East Texas or someplace like that.
A Norman restaurant owner has seen a week's worth of business in one day after this social media post went viral.
He came in on his group and he saw me walking around and he's like, man, what's going on? I said, I'm just waiting for my customers.
For the last 4 years, Spiral's sales have been up and down, especially starting in the pandemic. They sell specialty hot dogs, and now that business is booming, people can't get enough.
Every hot dog is named after my family. Every bowl has a family signature to it.
The customer who made the post tells us he never expected it to take off, but he's happy to see the owner getting tons of business.
And the next thing you know, all of Oklahoma City, Norman, and more have decided to come out and say hello.
Now, thanks to the post, he's on the social media train and is grateful for all the business.
It makes you a believer in social media for sure. Would love nothing more than to have this kind of traffic every day.
Miraculously, they only ran out of one sauce when the long lines hit their doorstep. And he says it's been great to see the response from the community.
Checking the weather now, troughs and lows are expected to bring showers and thunderstorms to parts of Western Australia, the northwest of the Northern Territory and parts of Queensland and New South Wales. Onshore winds feeding a trough will bring showers and the odd storm to parts of South Australia and Western Australia. In the major centres, there's a cloudy outlook for Sydney and Canberra, partly cloudy in Melbourne and Hobart. Sunshine for Adelaide and Perth, but the chance of a possible storm in Darwin. Showers for Brisbane. Looking further afield, thunder in Apia and Nadi, a few showers in Noumea, rain in Auckland and windy conditions in Wellington. In Southeast Asia, partly cloudy in Bangkok, thunder in Kuala Lumpur, thunder as well in Singapore, drizzle in Jakarta and rain in Honiara. Further north, rain for Seoul, drizzle in Tokyo, fine in Shanghai and partly cloudy in Hanoi. Heading west, partly cloudy in Beirut, fine in Tehran, partly cloudy in Islamabad, fog in Delhi and also Mumbai. Onto Europe now, snow in Stockholm, partly cloudy for Dublin, fine in Warsaw, cloudy in Madrid, clouds also over Istanbul and Athens. In Africa, clouds over Casablanca, fine in Cairo, partly cloudy in Nairobi and thunder in Johannesburg. In South America, drizzle in Panama City, rain in Bogota, more rain in La Paz and Rio and thunder in Asuncion. And for North America, drizzle in Vancouver, snow in Chicago, cloudy in Denver, cloudy also in Los Angeles, fine though in Mexico City. Hundreds of devotees in Brazil have gathered at a beach in Rio de Janeiro to pay their tribute to Iemanjá, a revered deity of the sea. Every year, followers of the Candomblé and Umbanda religions dress in white as part of the New Year celebrations, paying their respects to the sea goddess with offerings. The annual African-American tradition was brought over to Brazil in the early 19th century. Recapping our top stories now, at least 31 people have been killed in Ukraine, more than 160 others wounded after Russia unleashed its biggest attack in almost 2 years. The Ukrainian Air Force says Russia fired nearly 160 missiles and drones at cities across the country. Israel warns it's expanding its operations in southern Gaza as South Africa files an application to the International Court of Justice asking it to begin proceedings against Israel under the UN's Genocide Convention. And warnings are in place across much of the US West Coast as giant waves continue to pound the coastline. And that's the world this Saturday. I'm Anton Enus from the team. Good night.